welcome to this episode of the Global Conversations webcast. I'm Andre Darmanin, welcoming you back to another episode where we bring light to the issues that matter. Today, we're going to break all stereotypes and challenge the usual perceptions of neurodiversity as we discuss the truly incredible superpower that it is. Joining us today from across the pond, everyone here is from the UK tonight, and and joining us are three special guests who have made inroads in amplifying the narrative of neurodiversity and making their workplaces what I like to call neuro-inclusive. So first of all, we have Abigail Agay, a powerful force in the realm of diversity and inclusion initiatives. She's a member of the Order of the British Empire, which I am already honored as it is in terms of that. Abigail is noted for inspiring talks and thought leadership, including one that her and I had met on, talking about neurodiversity in the workplace through Apolitical, and also a TED Talk titled, Yes, Black Women Have ADHD Too and Need Your Attention. She brings to the table a rich background in advocating neurodiversity while delivering cutting-edge diversity and inclusion practices. Next, we have Lee Voisey, a leading advocate of acknowledging the positive and unique aspects of ADHD in the workplace. Lee is currently the marketing manager at Thread and held previous marketing roles at Lloyds Bank. His philosophy is start with why, apply design thinking, and do a little bit of nudging in the process and leading with empathy. He holds a bachelor's degree in design and technology management from University of Leeds. Welcome, Lee. And finally, my main man, Chris Foster. Chris and I met each other through Money 2020 back in June of earlier this year in 2023. So Chris is the co-founder of Open Book and an office engagement assistant at Thread. He has a passion for making business more diverse and inclusive. Chris has Armstrong syndrome, a genetic disorder related to Down syndrome, and cervical spondylosis, a spinal condition that affects his movement. He is autistic, and his role as office engagement assistant at Thread, a leading issuer payments processor. He manages various office functions, including meeting room management and ordering office materials. Outside of his office, as I mentioned, his passion is Open Book, a media platform where he's co-founded that highlights individuals with disabilities. And the mission of this organization is to allow individuals with the disability community to have their voices heard and to raise awareness to create fair employment opportunities for all. Chris offers invaluable insights into how businesses can embrace neurodiversity. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's dive right in here and talk about the extraordinary potential of those with neurodiversity. But before we get started, I want to give the audience a little bit of an insight in terms of who you really are and what people don't know about you. Before this webcast, as I was doing research on Lee, and I mentioned to him just earlier, his name comes up on IMDb. And so I wanted to say, were you an actor? He's like the closest thing, and I could see it. We could all see it. He looks like Matt Damon. And yes, that is true. So anyway.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
You didn't say that. Okay.
But thanks, Andre. It's kind. Very kind.
See, there you go. See? So I'm going to go around the table here. So tell us in like one short sentence, what is the one thing that is unique about you? So Abigail, let's start with you.
Oh, what is the one thing that's unique about me? I'm ambidextric, so you've still got me. It is slowing down a bit, but you can still see me okay, right?
Yeah.
I'm ambidextric, so I write with my right, but do everything else with my left. So, which I feel like is an embodiment of my ADHD, kind of just all over the place in some ways, but I do what I can with it. So yeah, I write with my right, but do everything else with my left. So that's something that's, I guess, unique to me.
Yeah. Okay. Lee.
So even though, as you mentioned, Andre, we're all based in the UK, but I actually have a maybe an unhealthy obsession and passion for a sport that's maybe closer to home for you, which is American football. And I am a massive, massive New York Jets fan and have been for maybe 15 plus years. Maybe a bit of a poor life choice because they've not brought me much or any joy in that time that I've been a fan.
Yeah.
But as someone who has no family relations or ties to New York, it's a bit of a strange one. I could not support any other team, but yet I had no affiliation to them whatsoever. It's just something that over my life has grown and grown and grown into what it is now, which is a well and truly hyperfocus every single day.
And we'll have to have a conversation about that afterwards. Chris, what's one thing?
Ooh, I suppose what a lot of people don't know about me is I write poetry.
Okay.
I love poetry. It's something that really kind of opened me up to, the lonely times in my life, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about. And if you like, I can share a poem.
Sure, you can do that. Sure.
Why not?
All right.
So I wrote this one of recent. You see, ignorance breeds hate where racism survives. You see, living in fear is destroying our lives. You better wake up your mind to open your eyes. You see, colour says nothing, what can't you realise? You see, dividing the people will never be strong. And I don't understand how it's lasted so long, but look, listen, it's a new era. It's a new time for change. So let's make a new world where love isn't strange.
Yes.
Little bit
amazing.
Of hope there. There you go.
There you go.
Woo!
Amazing, Chris.
I love that.
Okay, so let's get into the conversation here. Differentiating between accessibility and neurodiversity, and what I mentioned earlier called neuroinclusion. Why, is it the same thing? And if not, how and why? So I want to start with you, Lee, about that distinction, if you will, and then we can all chime in.
It's a tough first question, and I feel like my answer's maybe going to bring some debate. But that's why we're here, right? And it's important to have those difficult discussions, challenging discussions, openly and honestly as a group. So for me, I think they should be the same thing, and the why behind that is because when people are uncertain or unsure about a particular subject or topic that they're not confident with, quite naturally and understandably, they're going to be defensive or guarded towards it. My worry is that a lot of the people, particularly in corporate entities, sectors, aren't necessarily people like us. And it's a bit of a generalization, but I think it's fair to say. So if we are talking to an audience who doesn't necessarily understand what it's like to think and feel like us or be like us, they're already going to be maybe defensive or guarded. And if you were to say to them, you're doing this wrong or you're not doing this quite right, that's only going to make things worse. And for me, if you start to add more layers to it, or you start to make it seem like it's more complex, more layered, it's only going to make that worse in my mind. Whereas if you can define it in a way that it captures everything, you can start the conversation by saying, let's talk about accessibility, and it means everything. So as I'm talking to you now, you can feel confident, even though you don't necessarily get it, that we're covering everything here. And that is more likely to have a more positive reaction for someone to go, I don't know what it's like to be like you, but I understand what you're telling me. And I'm getting a little bit more confident because I know what you're telling me is everything. So for me, that's the why behind actually there's a benefit to letting it mean the same thing. But I also know how important individual labels can be as well. So there will always be an unintended consequence, and there will be challenges and issues if you did define it as one. But for me,
Okay.
it's maybe more important to the audience, and the audience, if those people are the change makers, it's about positioning it in a way that's simple for them to understand, not necessarily you or I.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think?
You know, it's very interesting because obviously I come on in a different angle here, being someone who's autistic, and you know, autism is slightly different from ADHD in regards of language, and you know, there's a real perception when people say autism, they get petrified and they're like, ah, they look at us that we're Rain Man, and we're, you know, that we're kind of get to that point of thinking I've got an eidetic memory, or I've or eidetic memory is someone that I can remember things, and I'm amazing with numbers, and I'm incredible with art, and I'm absolutely useless with numbers. I've got a memory like a sieve, and you know, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, so we're all completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the answer to my question is similar to Lee, but I'll add education. I think one of the beautiful things when I started working at Thread is that my manager had ADHD, so her understanding autism and neurological disorders had a massive impact on me, because she prepared those in my workplace. That she actually said, "Look, Chris is coming in. There will be a sense of, you know, sensory issues," and kind of implemented that, you know, on the foreground per se. So for myself, obviously, I've not had, you know, amazing opportunities like what you guys, new individuals and career choice. I've not had that, but for myself, I feel that it has been, the transition still needs a lot of learning and a lot of education. But I think if as Lee said earlier on, if the head is ready to have those conversations, then I feel that it will kind of amplify back into to all of my colleagues. And that's a wonderful thing for me saying that, colleagues, by the way, guys.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who's been working within the organisation now for nearly 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big thing for me, because, you know, for someone in my condition, I don't get the opportunities to work within financial services and within fintech. So, yeah, you know, that's my 2 pence. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. And, you know, so there's something that I want to touch upon, as you talked about, you know, there's individuality with people who are autistic or neurodivergent, if you will. And that brings me to the conversation about intersectionality. And I know that, you know, when I spoke with Abigail, or when I saw her speak at a webinar, you know, a couple of months ago, she talked about intersectionality in this, you know, in this space. And so, you know, how should organizations, in your opinion, Abigail, who are neurodivergent, how should they help people who are neurodivergent, and have other disabilities, with respect to this? So how should organizations respond to such different sets of people and skills and experience, lived experiences when it comes to this work?
I'd say, and first off, I'll give, I guess, a brief definition of intersectionality, because I guess what we've all touched on is it can probably feel overwhelming sometimes, all these different words. But I'd say intersectionality at kind of its baseline is just that acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination. So I talk about, and Chris has touched on, and then Loli has kind of all our different experiences. I have ADHD and dyspraxia, and I'm a Black woman with ADHD and dyspraxia. So I think there's those intersectionalities when you think of my race and being neurodivergent that can come into play. There's some experiences I, as a Black woman, might have that's different to a white woman, and vice versa, and things like that. So I think it's about acknowledging that and really kind of understanding, people's experiences. And I always say it can maybe feel challenging for organizations, but I think it's just really important at a first baseline to really assess the demographic of your workplace, to really kind of look at that entire makeup to understand where those intersectionalities may lie, because people's experiences will be different. I think it's like really important to speak to like your organization and colleagues, kind of understand their experiences individually. In groups also bring people together to kind of have those conversations as well. So I think it's really important to kind of hold spaces for people to have those conversations. And I'd say don't be afraid to devote resources and bring people in, like listen to the people there. I always say we're an expert of our own like lived experiences, but don't be afraid to kind of bring more of those devoted resources if you do need people who can really help with those areas. And there's amazing organizations that do that. So I think that's some of the ways, just a baseline to really think about in terms of thinking about that in, intersectional approach. Really understand the makeup of your workplace and their experiences. If there is some gaps, if you have diversity, but they're only kind of hitting a certain level of being able to progress in the workplace. Like once you kind of know the demographic of your organization and get a bit of an understanding of their experiences, I think that will help move things forward.
Yeah. And Lee, I know you, you mentioned it to me a while back in an earlier conversation in terms of being, a white person in this space, and how do we become, allies to those who don't look like us, especially when we're talking about this.
For me, and for anyone who is in a position of privilege, it's about listening to understand, because my experience is different, but it's important for me to understand what other people go through. And intrinsically, that is something that matters to me a lot. But I think it's also something that should matter to everyone, and matter even more so in a business environment, because ultimately your culture will drive results. So the more you can put into people, the more you will get out of them and out of the business. And from my perspective, I need to listen to other people to understand their experience. And even if their experience doesn't match my own, I'm believing what they tell me. And if they tell me their struggles, if they tell me their challenges, it's true. I don't judge. I don't undermine. I don't disbelieve, because they may not be things that I haven't experienced, but I haven't experienced them because of my privilege. So it's important that people who look like me recognize that, one, we need to listen to understand, because it's not about us. It's been about us, and it's still about us, which is why we see the problems that we have. So you can't make it about you, because it's not about you. You have to let your ego go. Listen to understand. And from that, do what you can to support them, whatever that looks like. But listening is often the first thing that needs to happen, but never does.
Yeah. And listening is something that, a lot of people, or at least active listening, are things that we don't really do well all that much, but it's still something that we need to hone in on, whether we are actually doing this work or not. And, and as I think about this, one of the things that we've come to know, at least, in the spaces that we're all in, is that, we continuously hear the saying that, neurodiversity, or in this conversation that we're talking about, neuroinclusion, is a superpower for organizations, regardless if you're a private sector, public sector, etc. So I guess, I want to get an understanding of why do we consider neurodiversity a superpower for businesses, and what advantages, or what kind of things that, what kind of opportunities are there, and what are people not knowing about people with who are neurodivergent? Chris, I mean, we see you on social media out there, and that's already a positive sign. So, I mean, tell us why that is, why it's all, why we should consider it as a superpower.
So to go back onto Abigail's point for a moment, and then I will go on to something.
Sure.
There's something that me and Abigail share very, very much in common. In reality, is we both get judged when we walk into a room if it's based upon race or physicality of someone who has a physical disability. And for myself, I feel that's really, really important to kind of say that, and why I can kind of empathize with Abigail. I won't understand because I don't know what it's like to be a black woman, right? But I can empathize in regards of our difference, right?
Yeah,
And why it's so important.
I can empathize with you with some, but won't be able to with some of your experience as well. So you're totally right.
Exactly. This is going back to the empathizing and why it's important, why I put myself out there to create the change of what I want to see. And I think, the sad truth about it is that my heart is, for disability inclusion and, in the workplace in such a big way. And in the result of that conversation, I have an obligation to put myself out there to see the change that I want to see. Now, one of the things is for me, and as you know, Andre, I spoke at Money 2020. I've spoke at Pay 360. I've just recently come back from Vienna speaking, and it's been amazing. But one of the things that I went out to set out to do was to go out there forcefully and say, I'm authentically have Down syndrome, I'm authentically autistic, and I can show everybody what I can do. But the reality is there was family members in the audience while I've gone out there speaking that have actually children that have additional needs. And then they look at myself as the possibilities of what their child can go out there and do. And I think this is what's breaking the mold on the stereotype of what, disability or neurodiversity looks like, is when we show up. We may not necessarily understand, the impact that we have onto somebody else's life, because people could turn around and say to me, Chris, what's it like before you were autistic? What was it like? Well, how would I know? Right? I'm a 45-year-old man, and I hear all the time, and this is a word that I've been really meditating on the other day about inclusion, right? Inclusion never existed when I grew up.
Right.
It wasn't a thing because because as a 45-year-old man, there was no one that looked like me. I saw nobody, right? So in the television, in any form of media, so all I've ever known was just different. And it's only of the last sort of 10 years that we kind of hear these beautiful words that I'm seeing young people, young disabled people going out there being authentically themselves. I look at them and I'm like, wow, I wish I could have done, right? They've blown me away. And for myself, with the voice that I've got now, I've got to be honest with you, I've got an obligation for that next generation to come to say that I can. And I think for me, that gives me the ability to go out there and actually turn around and be like, yes, you can, and yes, you will. And more importantly, the words that were echoed to me, I will echo back. And that is, I see you. I see you. I value you. And I'm here to hold your hand. And I'm going to support you to the next step ahead. Doesn't matter if it's from primary school to junior school to to secondary school to college to university. I was an individual that never had those abilities, and it's only of recent where I've took the courage to turn around and say, excuse my language, fuck it, I'm just gonna go for it, and I'm gonna be authentically myself. And then
Mhm.
through that, I'm changing that narrative, and
Mhm.
family members that are coming up to me and saying, now I believe.
Yeah.
That then spurs me on to go and do it, to break the boundaries even further, because I'm actually understanding that all things are possible.
Yeah. No, well said, well said. Especially, especially considering the fact that, whether we are, regardless of the color of our skin, we don't see people who look like us, and we've been, we've been hidden for various reasons because of the able-bodied, cisgendered, people that we see as the standard, if you will. And yet, there's people who have those superpowers, that have that ability. What I like to call the underestimated. And with your comment, Chris, that is the perfect example of why people are underestimated in this work. And and all of us, regardless of our race, our gender, etc., that we should not be underestimated because of the fact that you think you're the superiority, if you will. And that's something that we need to hone in on and make people aware within our organizations, that we have capabilities of doing that. And I applaud you for what you said here. And I want to also go back to something that we talked about here. Is Abigail and Chris, both of you have talked about having multiple disabilities. And so, so one of the things that I've learned, and this is through Abigail, where she mentioned about the term comorbidities. So how is it that people manage this, first of all, and second of all, how can workplaces be cognizant and inclusive of people that have these comorbidities, if you will? Abigail, let's start with you on in terms of that, because you're the one because that was a term I never heard of until I heard it from you. So definitely let's start.
Oh, I'm happy because that's funny enough. It's a word I'm familiar with, but I struggle to tend to say. I'm like comorbidities. I have to really break it down. But I think it's just at a base level, just I guess acknowledging the different medical conditions that people may have, or different with medical conditions, where it's diseases, anything, just that people may have more than one. So in my case, I have ADHD and dyspraxia, and people who are neurodivergent are more likely to have an array of other things. So ADHD, dyspraxia, more likely to have anxiety or depression. So have more needs to support their mental health. So I think it's being aware of that, and links to intersectionality in that way, that none of us are kind of one thing, and that we might have multiple needs, and really taking the time to kind of understand how they come together, how they work together, and how people's needs can be supported in that way. So I think that's the first step, kind of having these conversations to bring more awareness to these things to people's. And I think everyone on this conversation does an amazing job, and I'm constantly learning. I always, like I touched on earlier, I think it's important to know that people are expertise on their lived experiences, and having these conversations, learning from Chris about your Down syndrome and other needs and support that you have, and Lee, your experience as well, and same with you, Andre. I think having these conversations helps people, and to be able to move forward. So kind of bringing awareness, and then really thinking about how we can look at people's needs, because we're not kind of homogenous in that way. We do have multiple needs and support.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Lee, coming from your perspective, what are your thoughts on the being inclusive of those, especially who have multiple disabilities, and showing up in the workplace and allowing them to flourish in the workplace?
It all comes down to choice, right? And giving people options that they know can help them, or if they don't know can help them find out what works for them to thrive, either in the workplace or at home, or both. One of the things that we're seeing more and more now, and I've seen this work for me, and I know Chris uses this as well, is ChatGPT, and the functionality that can give, and the assistance that can give with whatever that looks like. So there is technology out there that can really help people. It all goes back to creating a space and an environment where people feel safe to share either their challenges or their struggles with their manager or with their head of department, and know that they won't be judged for that. Now, that's probably one of the first and most important things. And creating that safe environment starts at the top.
Mm-hmm.
The people at the head of the team and all the business need to set an environment where people feel safe to be vulnerable and know they won't be judged for it. And if you can do that, people feel safe enough to have those honest conversations, right? And say, I struggle with anxiety, depression, and ADHD. Those are all three things that I struggle with. So if I am in a position where I can be honest about that and say, from a sensory perspective, I need a desk in the office that has a wall behind it. Otherwise, sound behind me is too distracting.
Mm-hmm.
I need noise cancelling headphones, or I need to work from home 2 times a week to help manage anxiety of just the demands of everyday life, or the commute, things like that as an example. I might be in a position where I can articulate what I need, but other people might not be. And so you can either, that's where businesses maybe need to be more proactive in saying, right, we know Lee has ADHD. And to Abigail's point, who else in the business, or who do we know has been open enough to share with us that they have ADHD? What can we learn from them and see if we can help Lee? But that's where there can often be a challenge between, is this a business priority or not? Is this driving revenue or not? So that balance, or that question, that there isn't an answer to that. But if we can create that environment and then give people choice, but help them understand what choice is right for them, then that can go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
Chris,
piggyback
last
off
words.
that? I'll try and
Oh,
keep
sorry.
it
Go ahead.
No, is that okay? No, just Lee just sparked some stuff in my ADHD brain. What Lee, you said about the business needs. I think that's the thing that I think when we kind of touch on organizations, it actually, they need to know that it is a benefit, even just from if you just want to look at it from a profitable end, having diversity of thought and having an array of people with kind of diverse backgrounds and skills often is long-term more profitable for an organization. It helps with retention long-term because people are more likely to stay in the organization. So I think they should understand things from that perspective. And I think, Lee, also the point you made about especially creating those safe environments, that is like pivotal more than anything else. I think it's always important when a colleague comes to a manager or comes to their organization, says that they need support, that's really taken into account, that people often don't always have the language. A lot of people don't know that they're neurodivergent or that they have additional needs. They just know that they need some support. So I think it's really important to take the time to firstly acknowledge that with a colleague, to say, thank you for coming to me. Let's see what support we can give you, and let's see how we can put things in place. So I have something that I do with colleagues and people I've managed in the past that is something as simple as a personal preference sheet, and it just has things on it like, how do you like to receive feedback, what hours do you like to work, just kind of simple things to help facilitate the conversation. What additional support would help kind of facilitate working in the working environment. So like Lee touched on with headphones, I've got multiple screens, like sometimes kind of aiding with some of those questions can help people think of, okay, yeah, these things might help me be able to work together. And also I like share that with my team as well, people I work with, so they understand that we all kind of do have different needs. It's about how we can cater to supporting people. So I think it is really important to create those safe spaces to have those conversations, and to, like Lee said, lead, like the top should be leaning on and taking the lead in that. Of course, it's important to have marginalized communities, and there's networks and people like ourselves who do that amazing work, but make sure you're actually leading from the top, saying we want to actively push this work forward and not rely on those marginalized groups, but take their insight to kind of make things better, but make sure that their lead in with those like smart objectives to make things happen.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm going to come with a different angle, right? That would be me, right? So for myself, access to work. So it's a government scheme, Andre, here in the UK called Access to Work. And what Access to Work is I have my own PA. Lee knows my PA, my personal assistant, Grace, an incredible lady that she's been with me now for just over a year and a half. And she helps and aids me with my work on a day-to-day basis. And my work is being done, and the company has actually taken her on. Really, like she's part of the furniture, rightly. She's just there. Everybody knows her.
Cornerstone.
I think a lot of people
Cornerstone.
kind of assume that she actually works for the company, but she doesn't. She's there just to support me and my work. I mean, I work part-time, so I work 3 days a week. I start work at 7 a.m. in the morning and I finish at 3. And the reason why I do that, as someone who is autistic, sensory issues, I get on a complete overload. So when comes sort of like 9 o'clock in the morning, when they're in the commute traffic and it's absolutely manic, I'm like, can't handle it. Too much noise, but too much light. It's too bright for me, and I don't like it, and I'm a mess. So my work has made that simple little reasonable adjustment, that me getting there at 7 a.m. in the morning, ready to set up the meeting rooms, ready to collect the post, preparing everything. So when Lee gets into work, these things are already done, in place for them to go out there and do their job. And for me, that simple little reasonable adjustment is actually taking away the stress and the strain of my own mental health. But it's these conversations that we're having right now that I hope could then be amplified to the wider audience and other organizations, to actually turn around and be like, oh, actually, that's a really simple, reasonable adjustment. That's not even costing it's free.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not costing the company anything. And and what a lot of people don't know, Andre, I know Lee and Abigail may know a little bit about this, being in the UK, is, do you know how much the company pay for Grace? Nothing.
How much? Yeah.
They pay absolutely nothing. The government pay Access to Work to actually go out there and help me on my day-to-day tasks. So there's no excuse. Companies can't turn around and say, oh, well, it's going to be costly, it's going to be really expensive. No, it's not. It's free, right? And you get an assessment. Admittedly, the assessment is quite long, but when you've gone out there and done that assessment and got that individual into work, as Abigail rightfully said, when you actually have such a diverse group within the organization, other organizations want to buy into that product. And I think we're seeing that now, Lee. I think we can openly speak about these things, where other organizations that work within our company, they've seen me and they want to know more. They're leaning in and they're like, so you have someone with Down syndrome working in finance? Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's amazing. And I think that's the type of impact that we really want to be seeing, and we can illuminate that, and then that hopefully we can start seeing a little bit more of a better world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I just say, and then I promise I will mute for a bit.
It's okay.
It's all passion. I just wanted to make that point on Access to Work, Chris, because that's a brilliant point that I always forget to mention. It's so important because I'm going through the process right now. So it's like Chris said, it's a grant. I think you can get up to £60,000 worth to support your needs. I might be wrong with the figure, but it's
about that.
It's really important because that practical support that you can get, like Chris said, it's so important, and you don't need an official diagnosis. That's what a lot of people also are unaware of. That as long as you can kind of write down your needs and stuff, you don't need to have officially been diagnosed as being neurodivergent. As long as you, because a lot of people are often worried about that. That I'm trying to go through getting a diagnosis right now. As long as you can kind of articulate those needs, it can be validated at work and stuff. And there's lots of information online to help you with the process if the application form can be difficult for people. So that's really important because it's something I'm going through now, and I'm like, why didn't I do this earlier? But it's not talked about enough, so it's really important.
And it's a well-funded organisation as well. It's actually very well funded. And I mean, without getting too political, why they don't actually go out there and scream and shout about it is because let's be honest about it. It's a government scheme, and they don't want to go out there and fork out that money. That's why it's not going out there and publicist so much. But I think the actual fact that these things are out there for people that are neurodiverse, as well as those who have disabilities, and they're amazing. It's a long assessment. Don't get me wrong. It's a long haul. You can wait up to 16 weeks.
It's support out there
to get you
to fill in the application form.
Sorry, Abigail. Say that again.
Sorry, it's so delayed, isn't it? There is support to fill in the application form out there, and you can be employed or self-employed as well. So that's why it's really good to get that support to do it.
It really is. It really is. It
Definitely.
really is.
And
can I just say something?
Yeah, sure. I was gonna.
Sorry, Andre. I'll keep it very short, and I'll try and say it in a way that summarizes nicely what everyone has said. But we've talked about a few things like the government scheme, but also things that individuals can do, things that businesses can do. And to kind of pick up on what Abigail said, that she wished she'd done it sooner once she realized that maybe it was there and it was more straightforward than she thought. That thought process, I feel like it can happen for a lot of businesses where if they let go of the fear and just take time just to talk to the people in their office, talk to the people who are neurodivergent, have mental health issues or physical disability, whatever it is, just listen to them and understand what their needs are. Very quickly and very simply, you'll understand, they just need to be by a wall. They might need a section of the office for them and noise cancelling headphones. They need these softwares. Actually, that's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. And it kind of goes back to my first point around positioning it and framing it in a way that helps people to understand that, yes, there can be lots of labels and it's complex and it's sometimes difficult for the person with the condition or conditions to understand and articulate. But just by listening, actually you can do a lot in just that. And some of the solutions, because of that, can be free, simple, and easy to implement. And all of a sudden, it becomes a lot less scary.
Yeah. And going back to putting this all full circle, everyone talks, especially in the private sector and businesses, they look at it from a cost perspective. How does this affect our shareholders? What are they going to say? Like all of that. And of course, then going to, where Abigail, you and I have experience with the public sector in terms of what's the cost to taxpayers, right? But at the end of the day, this work, regardless of whether you are advocating for a program to assist and accommodate people with neurodiversity, or you are putting in programs to create equity in the workplace, business leaders or organizational leaders as a whole need to think of it as the right thing to do. And a lot of people don't see it that way. And I wouldn't say that they're not seeing it that way. They're coming around to that. And we're moving to the next stage of accepting that everyone is different, regardless of being able-bodied, having, being white, being black, being Asian, etc. It's how do we embrace everyone's different perspectives, different knowledge, different abilities, etc., and providing that opportunity for them to thrive in their organizations. Because at the end of the day, if you're not doing that in your organization, guess what? They're going to find somewhere else to jump. They're going to jump ship, find somewhere else to go, and they're going to go to an organization who are doing those things. And it was great to hear from you, Lee, in terms of what's going on and both you and Chris, I should say, because you're both in the same organization, what you're seeing in your organizations in terms of accommodations. And Lee, in your point of, how your employer is providing you those opportunities to say, okay, this is what you need being in this space. I need noise canceling headphones. I need a wall behind me, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're starting to see other organizations out there, like, for instance, and we'll go back to the sports reference of, my hometown baseball team, the Toronto Blue Jays, in their stadium, they've had sensory rooms for children, right? So that they can, and of course, they have the ability to have noise canceling headphones to drown out the noise so that they can focus, right? And there's a restaurant here in Toronto that does the same thing. And all it is just having that humanity to do this and whatnot. And so the one thing I'm still trying to figure out in terms of acceptance, if you will, is that what is it that people need to, like, are there programs out there within a workplace? Have you had those experiences to say that, for them to be educated on what it is to be neurodivergent and what it is in terms of how to create those spaces for neurodivergent populations. So, and I guess that's the one thing we want to close off with in our conversation from the three of you, open forum, in terms of what neurotypical people can do to help create a more inclusive space and neuro-inclusive space outside of what we've discussed. So the floor is yours, whoever wants to join in.
I don't mind going first.
You go?
Lee, go. I want. No, there's a reason why I'd like to follow Lee, because I'd like to be interested in what Lee says, actually.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I feel like if I didn't say that, I would have forgotten what I wanted to say. So I jumped in before I just let my poor working memory take over. But so to answer the question, I'm going to just touch on a bit of a side story or a side answer, because one of the things I often do when I'm talking to someone who is neurotypical is I will reference celebrities or sportsmen and women who are or were at the top of their profession, who also have, in my case, ADHD. For me, that is often one of the simplest ways to demonstrate to someone who doesn't necessarily understand what it feels like. It's a simple way to demonstrate that given the right framework and some slightly adapted conditions, these people can thrive more than anyone else, and they can get to the top of their profession maybe even more quickly than anyone else. If you can tap into what is intrinsically passionate to them, what they find interesting, they are likely to outwork anyone else. Because the way that our minds work, we are constantly searching for sources of dopamine, because we don't produce enough of it naturally. So if we're constantly searching, that's sometimes where we can lose focus, or it might seem like we're losing focus, but our mind is just trying to find different sources at once. But then if you find that subject or that topic that it finds interesting, that it gets dopamine from, you can hyper-focus on it for hours and hours, days. And it's like me with American football, just kind of going back to that reference point. And it is the same in work. It can be the same in work for anyone, that if you find out what they're interested in, could be problem solving, or they're passionate about, could be creative tasks, then if you set them up with those types of tasks, they'll do them better than anyone, quicker than anyone. And so for me, when it comes to helping someone who's neurotypical understand, the first step is showing them that the potential, showing them that if they can help advocate or listen to understand or support me in getting or creating an environment that is going to be supportive of the way that my mind works, in the form of a desk in the corner or noise cancelling headphones, or just being there for me to talk to when I need to validate my feelings, if I'm going through sensory rejection or something like that. Having that person there, but also knowing that they can see the potential in someone like me if given the opportunity. And I think that's the most important thing for me, and in terms of how I would position it to them, because I don't need to convince myself, because I live like this, but they don't necessarily understand, and that's okay. I'm not expecting them to understand, because they will never understand fully, but they can understand the potential of someone like me if I can show them people like me. And if it's someone like a Michael Phelps, or it's more than likely, or Simone Biles, that person is going to go, I know who that is, and I've seen them win gold, and they've been able to make that kind of conscious decision that they are the best at what they do. So actually, there is truth to what you're telling me.
Great points, Lee. Abigail, Chris, anything to add to those before we close it off?
Chris, did you want to piggyback off?
First?
I'm happy. Or you happy for me to come in? Whatever's easier.
Whoever, go ahead.
I'll just go again.
Okay. Yeah, I would say I'll try. I'm going to try and keep as brief as possible. But I'll say first and foremost, engage with those communities. So whoever feels like, if we're talking about from an organization perspective, whoever's feeling the most excluded, engage with them, try and understand what their perspective is, what support they need, and then really try and hone in on like whatever the root of the problem is. So like we've talked about, this awareness is so important and representation is so importantly. That's something I do when I do talks as well. I talk about people, and Simone Biles is someone I mentioned, SZA, who's the most nominated person for the Grammys this year. She's a black woman with ADHD. I really try and show people who look like me and marginalized groups to have those conversations. But I think once you've kind of really engaged with communities to understand some of their unique experiences, really go into trying to understand what the root of the problem is, to look at how you can help them. So for instance, if it is things like interviews, how can you make the interview more inclusive? Try and understand like the processes there. What makes it hard for neurodivergent people with disabilities who might want to apply for the job? Really kind of start looking at those root causes. I think it's really important for people to do, and to also listen, trying to really understand how you can support them more, and also really like take the time to think about some of those targeted ways to help them. That doesn't always have to be big, but make sure they're kind of like actual sustained action. So some of the things that we've touched on, like reasonable adjustments, how they don't always have to be, the misconception is that they always have to be big things. Think about that, listen to people and understand in small ways how you can help them. Make sure you're doing your research to understand what support and needs they need as well. And I always say, like, partner up with people if you don't know as well. Like, don't be afraid to bring in organizations and people that can help people as well. So that's what I always kind of say. First and foremost, engage with communities to understand the support they need, and then think about those root problems and what support can be brought in. It doesn't have to always be big, but think about making sure that it's kind of sustained impact, and understand that it's going to be a journey to improve these things, but keep on going.
Love that.
Yeah. Chris?
Thank you. First of all, allyship. I think that's a really, really important word, especially within our workspace. I can only talk about me. I can't talk about anybody else. I can only talk about myself, right? As I said, still the sad truth and the reality is I still don't see anyone that looks like me. to, and I can talk about that within media. I can talk about that in work. So I do still feel I'm a one-off. And there's thousands of me in the UK that are just ready, wanting to work. And I think Abigail touched on a very important part there is recruitment in the recruitment sector in regards of how we're trying to go out there and find the disabled talent to bring them in, because the reality is they're not applying for the jobs. It's not like they don't want a job, but they're not applying for the job, because the truth be told is the aspect of applying for the job accessible for a disabled person to want to go out there and apply for the job in the first place. So I feel that in the recruiter perspective, they need to understand that they may necessarily have to go out there and find the talent rather than actually the talent going to them. And I think one of the beautiful things with myself is, Annette Evans, who sadly doesn't work for the company anymore, was the person that brought me into the company. She now works at Google. She's a dear friend of mine. So she's known me for probably close to 20 years. And when I lost my job, sadly, to disability discrimination, and I'm very open about that, she wanted me to come into this company because she saw the abilities that I can do and offer. And she said, when the company see you, that you will flourish. And I'll be the first one to admit this. When I first started, I thought I'd be there a month, and I really did. Like, I thought, I laugh about it now. I won't bait out their namely, because you know who they are, right? But there's people that believe that I was there at work for work experience. And they were going up to my manager and they're like, oh, Chris is such a lovely guy. It would be great if we could get someone like Chris to come in and actually work for the organization. And, bless her, she turns around and goes, well, actually, he actually does work here for real. And they're like, really? And it's like, yeah. And they're like, oh, wow. But it's amazing over this last, 18 months, nearly 2 years now, that those same individuals that have actually come up to me and turn around and saying, Chris, you've changed my mindset. And I think that is the importance here, right, about the allyship, because I'm telling you, and Lee will tell you this, everybody in our company where we work, Lee, would you agree with me? They're cheering me on.
Definitely.
Like, they really are. They are just cheering me on. Like, I can't stress it enough to you. I mean, like, when I come back from Monday 2020, like, I won an award for that. The company, because they turn around and they were like, Chris, you do realize that this has never been done before. Like, it's never, no one at Money 2020 with Down syndrome has ever spoke on a stage in front of, well, I spoke twice that month, twice that week, Andre, right? One in Rise Up and one on the main stage.
Yeah.
And it's never been done before. So, and I'm telling you, when I spoke at Pay 360, Lee was there. And I tell you what, Lee, I'm sorry, I'm going to bait you out. But my brother, he was crying. He was so full of so much emotion. And that's the thing, right? You've got colleagues that are cheering me on. And then in cheering me on, they're ready to bring someone else in. And that's the wonderful thing. And I'm not just trying to big up my company now, but let's be honest. There's not many organizations that are going out there and saying, well, let's actually go and let's go and actually employ the most marginalized groups in society and actually take them on board and give them an opportunity to shine. Yeah, and I think that's what we need to do here. We need to champion each other, no matter what organization you are, no matter what race you are. Because one thing that neurodiversity doesn't do, guys, it doesn't discriminate. It affects every race, religion, sex, and age. But this is why it's important to have this conversation. And I just want to say firsthand, Andre, thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Lee. This was an enlightening, inspiring, and joyful conversation to hear the three of you talk about not only your experiences, but also how can you thrive in the organizations that we're part of, and what people can learn from you being those inspiring voices. I mean, like I said, throughout all of this, Chris, I met you first at Money 2020, and you were an inspiring figure to not only myself, to others, and Abigail as well. Your talk at Apolitical a few months ago was also inspiring to people at where within my community of colleagues and friends. And Lee, besides the Matt Damon reference that we talk about here, and your sad.
None of this was scripted. I promise.
This was scripted, exactly.
Andre, now you're saying it, I see it. Now you're saying it, I see it.
Exactly.
No, you can't unsee
it. And of course, I was just going to say before we close off, I was going to say to Lee, I mean, I feel for you with your love of the New York Jets, even though my Bills beat you a couple of weeks ago.
I'm glad you waited till the end to tell me that.
Exactly.
Well
so
played.
I had to throw that dig. But anyway, so with that, I want to close off. Just again, thank you. And where can people find you on social media? So Abigail, let's start with you, Lee, and then Chris.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I used to do a lot more, but I'm trying to get back into the flow of things. So I have a newsletter as an ADHDer that I used to put out there. I used to do a lot of LinkedIn live chats where I'd speak to people with ADHD, especially from an intersectional lens. I also have my TEDx that's on YouTube as well that you mentioned earlier on. So that's where you can find me. And I'm trying to do more on Instagram, trying to get back into the Instagram and TikTok world, but that can be quite overwhelming. But yeah, they're the places you can find me: LinkedIn, my TEDx on YouTube, and Instagram. All Abigail Ajay, Agyei.
Lee,
for me, LinkedIn, just search my name, Lee Boise, and I think I'm the only one. I should be the only one. If I look,
except for the IMDb reference.
Well, yeah, I feel like. Don't get confused. Lee Boise is not spelled the same way as Matt Damon. It's just Lee Boise, and you should find me.
And Chris, I mean, you're world known over here, so I mean that'd be not hard to find you. But anyway, besides the point, tell everyone how they can find you.
So obviously as well, you can kind of follow me on LinkedIn, Chris Foster, spelled Kris Foster. You'll see me sitting on a beautiful red chair. You can also find me on Instagram called Open Book. An Open Book is a platform where we celebrate and educate brands about disability inclusion. We're currently starting it up as a media platform so we can give voices to individuals like yourselves, that they can kind of showcase their talents and the abilities of where their voices can be heard. Please follow. It would be great to connect, and I'm looking forward to see what comes from this. So thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for listening and watching on another episode of Global Conversations. Once again, I'm Andre Darmanin. You can find us on the YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast platforms. So until next time, until the next episode, I bid you adieu and have yourselves a wonderful day. Bye-bye for everyone.